One of the worst and best things that's ever happened in MMA or UFC has been the ESPN deal. It's a great thing because it brought in an influx of new fans and put MMA more on the mainstream. And it was a bad thing because it brought in new fans and put MMA on the mainstream. So you have all these new fans coming into the sport, which MMA isn't even a sport. It's more than a sport. It's never been a sport. It's always been a spectacle. It's always been more than a sport. I don't know what to call it or what to say it is, but it's not a sport. A sport is shooting a basketball, going into the thing. A sport is throwing a football, making your point. MMA is more than that. It's some warrior shit. It's about your heart. You know, you could play basketball all day. I don't believe basketball is about heart necessarily. I don't believe football is about heart. You know, in MMA, you have to show heart. You know, you'll never get a moment like Khalil Roundtree versus Alex Pereira, when Khalil is not backing down and Alex got rocked in the first round, and he comes back and he goes in a flow state and he finishes him. You're never gonna get something like that in basketball or football. Yeah, you might get Michael Jordan flying through the air dunking on people, but does it take heart to do that? You know what I'm saying? So that's why MMA is more than a sport, and it needs to be treated as such. You know, my big issue with the ESPN deal and the new fans who are in the sport are they don't know what they're looking at. They don't know what they're talking about, and they're covering it and talking about MMA like it's a regular sport. I don't know about football. I don't know who the oldest person in football is, but I don't think there's a lot of 35-year-olds in football or whatever. You know what I'm saying? MMA, it takes so long to become good at martial arts that most guys aren't champions until they're in their 30s. You know, it's very rare that you have someone like Ilia Topuria. That's very rare. You know, McGregor, when he was coming up, he became champion, I believe, at like 28. But for the most part, you know, let's look at Alex Pereira. Alex Pereira is 38 years old, you know, whooping people's ass. And he has a whole long lifetime of kickboxing experience, is the reason why he's being able to become a champion in MMA at 38 years old. Look, Glover Teixeira. Glover Teixeira, 45 years old when he won the belt. You're not going into football and winning Super Bowls at 45 years old, as far as I know. But you got these guys who come in and they're covering the sport. They're covering MMA as if it's a sport. For example, Stephen A. Smith, when he came into MMA, bro was talking about MMA like he's some expert. Bro had no idea what he was talking about, and he got exposed. He didn't even know how to throw a punch. He's probably never been in a fight a day in his life, and he's talking about someone like Cowboy Cerrone, calling him a coward, calling him weak, because he doesn't know what it's like to get punched in the face. He doesn't know what it's like to struggle in a fight. So that's my big issue with the ESPN deal. You got all these different sports fans coming into the sport talking about guys like John Jones. John Jones has been champion since I was in high school. Bro's been champ for like 15 years. Yeah, he was on steroids. He popped for steroids multiple times. But everyone he fought was on steroids as well, for the most part. Let's be serious. Vitor Belfort was on steroids. He was on TRT. A lot of those dudes back in those days were on steroids. So let's be real. John Jones is champion because he has a bigger heart than these guys. He's tougher than these guys. He's smarter than these guys. And he's just he's obviously physically gifted as well with his height and his reach. You know, you could say that he was a heavyweight fighting at light heavyweight, you know, because he was able to cut weight the perfect amount and get his body to the point where he just had a bigger heavyweight reach at light heavyweight. But now people are trying to change the narrative and be like, oh, John Jones fought an old Stipe. Okay, but he's a heavyweight. You know what I'm saying? It's just like these talking points. Kamaru Usman's fighting Joaquin Buckley. Kamaru Usman's 35 years old. People are saying Kamaru Usman's old. He's washed. Kamaru Usman's not old. He's still a beast, right? Gilbert Burns fought Jack Della Magdalena. And he was beating Jack Della Magdalena. Jack Della Magdalena comes out in the third round, finishes him. He goes on, becomes a champion. Kamaru Usman, I don't believe he's going to beat Joaquin Buckley, but he's not old, you know, but it's just a real lazy approach to the sport. You know, if you're training martial arts, it's like, for example, jiu-jitsu, it takes 10 years typically to become a black belt in jiu-jitsu, at least. So if you start training when you're 12 years old, which is, you know, I don't think that's the typical rate, but if you start training when you're 12 years old and you work diligently for 10 years and you become a black belt, now you're 22 years old. Now you have to learn striking. It might take you 3 years, 4 years to get good at striking. Now you're 26 years old. Now, boom, you're in your fight career. Now it might take you a few years to get to UFC, you know, and it might take you a while to develop. You might take some losses along the way. Now you're 30 years old. Now, boom, you're in the UFC. You get some good fights under your belt. Now you're 32 years old. Now you're in your prime. And that's the typical way it's gone, you know. But ESPN, the ESPN deal has made it to where they're trying to make MMA a sport, and it's not a sport. And it's really dulling the product down. You know, you got guys like Stephen A. Smith who never trained a day in their life. We've seen, which I'm going to pull up Stephen A. Smith holding pads later on, coming into the sport, talking about guys like Cowboy Cerrone, who's a warrior. The reason Rogan was so good at his job is because he was also a martial artist himself. So he understands what it means to get kicked upside your head. He understands what it means when a fighter is in there throwing hands and he's fighting back. He understands it on a deeper level, you know?
Yeah. I was upset at Stephen A. Smith, and then he made a video responding to me.
Come on.
Listen, Stephen A. Smith, I guess I should respond, right? You're a very entertaining guy. I like you a lot. And I appreciate the props you gave me in that video, but you're wrong.
Yeah.
Cowboy got fucked up with those shoulders in the clinch. He had Connor's arms tied up, and they're in tight spaces. Connor dips low and slams this bone of his shoulder into the nose.
He's never been hit with the shoulder bone.
At the beginning of the round, Connor's a fucking super explosive guy. Super explosive. All muscle, just fucking pulled tight at the beginning of the fight, and just bang, bang. He got off good shots, and Cowboy was confused.
I think he was flustered.
I
don't think that those shots maybe rocked him.
They broke his nose,
and that could rock you.
Well, he's got blood pouring out of his nose, so he's not breathing out of his nose now. And then all of a sudden, he's like, "Fuck, my nose is already fucked up," and he hasn't even punched me yet.
Right?
You know, it was.
So Stephen A. Smith was. This is the Cowboy Cerrone McGregor fight, which was forever ago, but. When that fight happened, Stephen A. Smith was saying Cowboy quit, blah, 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 this and that. Cowboy got his ass whooped, all right? It was 45 seconds, but he got his ass whooped. So Stephen A. Smith doesn't understand that because he's not a martial artist. But these guys who come into the sport who aren't martial artists just don't understand. And that's my biggest issue with the ESPN deal. One, it's always been a spectacle. That's what made it exciting. You know, the more you try to make MMA and UFC like NBA or NFL, it just really ruins the sport. And that's why we're seeing less promotion of the fights. We're not seeing the primetime UFC primetimes no more, which were great content. We're not seeing these things. And it really does dull down the sport. So that's why the ESPN deal was great for MMA in the sense that it brought it to more eyes, made it mainstream. But in the same sense, those same things is actually what did a lot of damage to the sport. You know, when it was on Spike TV, you knew what you were getting. You know, you're going to crack open the beer, you're going to get with the guys, you're going to watch the fights. It's going to be crazy. It's going to be absolutely insane. Now, it's like we're going to watch football, and then we're going to watch MMA, and they're both the same thing. They're both just sports. And I disagree with that. You know, I like stuff like Pride FC back in the day. It was a spectacle. There are storylines. The walkouts were great. And you could really become more of a fan of the sport. And I think the more they try to make MMA a sport, quote unquote, it really does it a disservice, because it's not a sport. It's more than that. It always has been, even back to the ancient Roman days when they're doing pancration. When you have a pancration death match, or not even a death match, just a pancration fight, very different than the throwing the ball in the hoop game, you know? So I think it's great that ESPN deal's coming to an end. And I think if they go to Netflix, it's going to be a better deal, and it's going to be better for the fans, and it's going to be more exciting and more entertaining. As long as they get away from this whole sport, trying to make it a sport, and go back to the old school ways. Go back to UFC 100 days when we had Brock Lesnar coming out. You know, interesting matchups, interesting fights. But that's my 2 cents. You know, I'm no expert. I'm just a dude who's been watching MMA and fighting, you know, and made it my whole life. But that's my take on it. You know, ESPN deal was good for MMA for the moment, but it's necessary to get out of it. And I think they should go back to the Spike TV days.